I'm thrilled to introduce Joe Coulter. Joe has spent the past 15 years navigating the complex world of mortgage underwriting in the Northeast. Now, while I cherish his expertise and insights into the mortgage industry, I more so cherish his friendship. Joe, thank you so much for being in my orbit and for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations.
It's great to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to ask you all the things I'm not supposed to ask somebody at a dinner party. So I would love to get into that, really what's going on behind, I don't know, closed doors and people's bank accounts, the things we're, again, not supposed to know. But before we
Sure.
do, walk me through your journey. How did you get into the mortgage industry?
I've had a little bit of a peripatetic life, I guess. A couple of different things, including I started off right out of high school in construction. And I think it was my first winter trying to tack up siding in negative 10 degrees that I realized this was not the life for me. And so I had a friend of a friend who happened to work at a mortgage company, and they needed somebody to help write copy. And this is long enough ago that we used to write ads and put them in the local newspaper. It doesn't really exist anymore, but they knew I read a lot, and that's one of the good things about reading. If you read a lot, you can end up writing. So I ended up writing weird just advertisements and stuff and things like mailers that went out to people. Like at some point, those were being written by me. Now, of course, artificial intelligence is kind of taking all that over. So back in the day, about 20 years ago, if you got a letter, it might have been for me writing about whatever it was. And then just sort of one of those things where you just ended up ping-ponging around one job to another. And then they needed an opening, and I just started doing it. And I think with a lot of professions, like being a lawyer or a doctor, your first couple of years, you feel like you're committing malpractice. And I certainly felt like that as well. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just sort of continued doing it and fumbling my way through. And then one day when I picked my head up 5 or 6 years later, I realized I think I actually know what I'm doing. So this is crazy.
That's awesome. So there's still hope for me then.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think every time we've talked about this, it blows my mind the intimate view you have and very unique perspective you have on people's lives, that after doing this for so many years, it's old hat to you, but this is stuff that we're all curious about. So I would love to dive into that, first beginning with probably, let's say, like the big kahuna. So when you're driving through a neighborhood, you see the $1 million plus homes, the new Porsche 911 in the driveway, kids are in private schools. I would
Yeah.
love to know what they really look like. So you've underwritten hundreds, maybe thousands of loans for people, maybe jumbo loans is what they'd be called. But what are these people earning? Let's start there. And then I'd love to get into their savings and debt and kind of what's going on under the hood there.
Sure. Yeah. It's a little bit like the doctors who deliver babies trying to figure out how many babies have you delivered. You just kind of have to do some back in the envelope math. I was thinking it's somewhere in the 10 to 12,000 loans that I have personally done. And then for a period of time, I was doing some management and then sort of leadership roles where I was being consulted on different things. So I saw different aspects of thousands of more files. I've seen a lot. So like to start from the physical, bigger houses aren't nicer than normal size houses. So if you see like these beautiful houses from the street, just think about your house or your apartment, wherever you live, and there's like a water stain on a wall somewhere, or there's a piece of tile that's curled up in the corner. Big houses are just like that, just more of them. So the little stain isn't in one section of your bathroom, it's in 7 bathrooms if it's in this giant palatial estate. There are very few. I mean, I can count, a dozen of them that I've seen over the years that were big and nice. Most of the time, those big houses are just your regular houses, and all they do is just make them bigger. So the same quality, the same stuff, the same door handles you have at your house are the same door handles that are on $2, $3, $4, $5 million houses. Once you start getting into a little bit higher end, like depending on where you are in the country, in New England on the eastern seaboard, you start getting above about 5 million. You start seeing really nice stuff. So in those 10 or 12,000 files are all appraisals. So I've seen the physically inside what's in all of them. Another insight is, especially on the refinances. So like when you're buying a house or you're selling, usually someone will come through and tell you, hey, listen, you need to get rid of half your stuff and make it nicer, make it look good. And the cleaning company comes through. So on the new homes, they all look pretty good. The refinances are great because exactly like your house looks like is what everyone else's house looks like too. So it looks like the Cookie Monster vomited Legos all over your floors and there's stuff everywhere. The nicest and biggest houses look exactly the same. So there's clothes on the floor. There's rubber duckies in the bathtub. They are exactly the same. So do not feel bad if you're at home and you're just tired after a long day of work and the kids have thrown Cheerios all over the rug. That's what everyone houses look like. I would say less than 10% of houses actually look clean. So don't worry about it. Your house is fine. Everything's fine. You're right along with everybody else.
Perfect. Well, I
As
feel better about myself.
as far as the nuts and bolts, when you're actually looking at the financials of folks, so it's a little bit striated, but so let's start at the top end. People have said like there's rich folks and then there's wealthy folks. So like rich people are people who are high earners who are working. Wealthy people like are not working. They just have assets and the assets generate for them. Generally, we don't see the wealthy people. So above us, there's private banks and they don't have a lot of regulations and there's not really a lot of underwriting and technical things that go on. It's somebody with hundreds or billions of dollars at a boutique private bank that doesn't advertise. Other wealthy people kind of tell you. And you just say, hey, I've got $1 billion in the bank and I want to buy a $100 million horse farm in Naples. Give me 50 million. To them, this is a business decision. It's not an underwriting one. They have to say, well, what's the likelihood our person who's a Hollywood actor knows how to run a horse farm? There's a pretty significant chance that this is all going to go horribly and we're going to lose everything. But if they've got $1 billion with us, is this just a rounding error? If we end up, we have to go to foreclosure. If we lose 10 million or 20 million, are we going to make it up on some other things? They run through a totally different thought process. We don't usually see those people. We do see people who are high earners, and generally it's less money than you would think. So strangely, the people who make the most amount of money as a W-2 earner, meaning you're an employee, it's sales, a lot of it. So it's about 50-50. So 50% of it is sales. There is a guy I know who's a very successful salesperson, makes about $1 million a year, plus or minus, and has for 20 or 30 years. He lives in a beautiful community next door to all these professional athletes. When he has a Christmas party or something, and the neighbors come over, and always when there's a new neighbor, everyone kind of looks at each other a little bit sideways, like, hey, well, so what do you do for work? And, if you're a recognized professional athlete, pretty easy. A lot of people are like, it's surgeons and executives and things. And he always likes to chuckle that he's like, oh, I'm just a sales guy. I just sell stuff. And then like 2 neighbors that had moved in next to him were 2 pediatric surgeons. He made more than 2 of them combined.
Oh,
The people making the most amount of money are salespeople as employees. So there's that. And then the balance is going to be self-employed folks. The self-employed people are interesting because it's not the type of people you think who were executives at some sort of pharmaceutical company and spun off a business and they're the CEO and owner of that. It's regular people that It's the plumbers and the electricians and the people who own septic design companies and engineering firms. That's where the money's really being made. So we see the people at that level, that's what it is. Now, even though those houses are giant and, they've got the nice cars, like most people, they're not too many missed paychecks away from being in trouble. Napoleon said, like, quantity it's its own quality. So if you're making $100,000 a month and you miss a paycheck here or there, you've got $100 or $200 or $300,000 in liquid funds. So like 3 months reserves to them is $300,000. For a lot of people, that's years of earnings. So even though they have a lot of expenses, $300,000 can buy you a lot of time. It buys you a lot of options, even though proportionately they probably have less than what the average person, say, has saved. A lot of them, you mentioned kind of like the cars and stuff. Yeah, I see it. Virtually every new car is leased, and specifically luxury cars. So the Porsches, all the exotics, all the Ferraris, all those, they're all leased, all of them. And generally they're self-employed folks. And there's some tax benefits of writing off some of the payments if they're leased and above a certain weight, which is why I see a lot of self-employed people, especially in the trades, all have these giant pickups, or it's the Escalades, Lincoln. There's a couple of cars that hit the weight limit where they can be deducted.
yeah, the G-Wagon, right?
The G-Wagon, that drives me crazy when they talk about that section 179 depreciation. So it's like an old joke from Seinfeld where it's like, yeah, it's a write-off. And it's like, well, what's a write-off? Like, I don't know, but they do. Like, it's not free money. It's a write-off, but it's not free money. And people get confused about that. Even people who are pretty sophisticated, they just think like it's magic. Like, it's just the payments just like it disappears, like the truck is yours and you don't have to pay for it. Like, no, you're still paying for it. It's just a matter of what your tax liability is at the end of the year. But when you see people like that, like who look like they're high earners, like they are, and that new Porsche in the driveway is a $2,000 a month lease. And at the end of 24 months, they're going to give the lease back. So again, don't feel bad if you see people like that. Like, don't compare yourself in that regard. Nobody owns that. Strangely, the people who have old cars, own them. So take from that, what you will.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious because you mentioned about they're kind of living paycheck to paycheck almost. Their paychecks are 100,000 a month, but they tend to have a lot in investments as well, given where they're at in their career trajectory.
Yes and no. They do have money invested more than you would think, where it's all in a 401k. So these are all tax deferred products. So there is some liquidation going on of those, like retirement and IRAs. So a lot of them they maxed out their 401ks and they have IRAs. And a lot of them do. Yeah, they're either borrowing from 401ks, which isn't a lot. You can only borrow up to about 50,000, or they're in defined benefit plans where they can actually withdraw while still in service, taking a tax penalty, or they're liquidating IRAs, which they've been saving up over a period of time, but they are liquidating them and incurring the penalties. A lot of them are bonuses or restricted stock units. So in the Northeast, there's a lot of industry, in that New York to Boston corridor. There are people, especially like on the software side, software engineers, they're getting restricted stock. And the market's performed, pretty well over the last 15, 20 years. So those restricted stock awards have been increasing in value. So a lot of the down payments we see are from finally liquidating these stock awards, which comes with its own tax issues. That's what we see a lot. And then a lot of them are just like normal folks, where they started small and kind of built up in terms of housing. They bought houses 20 years ago. They sold it for a profit, rolled that equity to the next one, to the next one. But again, it's about the quantity. If your starter home was $1 million and you see 10 or 20 or 50 or 100% appreciation, depending on where you are. Whereas if you bought a $100,000 house, your 10% appreciation is $10,000. Well, if it's $1 million, it starts becoming a pretty sizable chunk of change. If you bought your $2 million house and now you're selling it for $4 million, 100% appreciation is a significant down payment on an $8 or $9 million house. Now you're putting down $2 million. So that's where a lot of that stuff is coming from.
Yeah,
More than you would think is still coming from gifts. Even these $1 million and $2 and $3 million homes, where they're making significant down payments, 10, 20, 30%. It's not unusual to see a gift come through for $400,000 or $500,000.
maybe a big factor here is time too, is that people who are in their 30s and 40s and still, really kind of at the peak of their career and haven't quite crossed over to that point where they've been earning this amount for 15, 20 years and can then, have the assets that you're describing. So I think time's a big factor. What about normal people? So when I say normal people, I mean not the what we've been talking about, this perceived upper echelon, but I once heard a stat, I think probably within the last few months, that, and I don't remember where it was, probably Dr. Google told me this, but that the average American salary is $70,000. What would you say is the average salaries you're seeing for people who are purchasing homes? Maybe let's talk about maybe first-time home buyers. Maybe that would be a good place to
Sure.
start.
It's close. There's a little bit of a self-selection bias as well, that you feel like you're in a position to buy a home. So there tends to be some self-selection of people sort of on the upper end of that, but that's absolutely not always the case. 70,000 is probably about right. That's about $30 to $35 an hour if you're working a 40-hour work week. We see people right around there. That's more of sort of like a skilled trade type job. So it's not like you can go to Home Depot today and get a job for $20 an hour. So this is on the upper end of that. So usually it's some people with some training. It's the electricians and the plumbers, and it's the HVAC people and people installing garage doors, where there is a skill involved. It's not just showing up. But that's about what we're seeing, is somewhere in that band, in that sort of hourly type of work.
Yeah. How about their debt? Because that debt is a big component too. Another
Yeah.
Dr. Google search
Yeah.
result was that I think our credit card debt is at $1.1 trillion as in America. Are you seeing, especially in the last few years, and I'm not an economist, I'll never pretend to be, but with the macroeconomic challenges that we're facing as a country, as a globe, truly, but that since COVID, have you noticed that credit card debt and the number of open credit card lines, have you seen that increase? Because it does, again, based on this search,
Mhm.
seem like it has continued to climb. What are you seeing from a debt perspective from
Um,
Americans?
yes and no, which is always a great answer to give. Um, the amount of debt does not seem to have increased over my career. Now, that aside, there has always been a ton of debt out there. And most of them, yes, even though people are self-selecting, for the most part, who are applying, there are people who have a lot of debt. Not so much credit card. I don't see a ton of credit card debt. Definitely, it's out there. And again, like the higher earners, you would be surprised, have more debt virtually than anybody else. I think they just feel like, well, I'm earning this kind of money, so if I'm earning $100,000 a month, what's $2,000 a month in interest to Capital One? Meaning, like I've got $20,000 on this credit card. Who cares? I'm going to make $100,000 next month. So they don't even think about it that way. So I do see a lot of debt in those folks. For regular folks, it's been about the same. We do see a lot of installment debt, meaning like it's car leases. Everyone's got car leases or loans, mostly leases. So that take that for what you will. There's some arguing on both sides of that, whether people should be buying outright or buying on installment or financing or leasing. I'll say to that one a little bit. Um, there are installment loans in terms of RVs and motorcycles and campers. We see a lot of that. And then installment loans for people who wanted to fix up their houses or want a fixed rate for something. We do see personal loans and installment loans in that regard, which I guess is better than revolving debt, like so-called like credit card debt. It's a much lower rate of interest. But that's held pretty steady. On average, we do see a fair amount of debt for most folks. That doesn't seem to have increased. I know what you're saying, like there is sort of this thing where like people are saying that this debt has ballooned, this credit card debt has ballooned. That might very well be the case. It might just be a self-selection thing where I'm not seeing a lot of those folks, but there is a lot of debt out there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've also noticed the prevalence of debt options when you go to purchase anything, be it a couch or a TV or a set of nice headphones, right? Like there's you can get options to purchase things on credit everywhere and anything. So that's where another I'm kind of curious if that's gone up. Have you also noticed people like the applications going down, especially with interest rates on the rise this past year? Have you noticed applications or your pipeline going down just this past year
Yeah.
alone, and people not maybe deciding to go buy a house when house prices are crazy here in the Northeast and also the interest rates going up?
Yeah, we saw application volume crater about 2 years ago when the interest rates kind of expanded. They were, somewhere in the 2-3%, 4% range, and then went up to basically 8.5. Application volume just absolutely cratered, and it decimated the industry. That trough has already passed. So we've kind of seen increases month by month very slowly ever since. So application volume is on the upswing, and it has been for, about 14 months, somewhere in that realm. We're not really sure what it means. It's always hard to kind of determine what's really happening. Is it seasonal? Is it just something that just happened? Is it a slow return to normalcy? Not really sure. Everyone has eyes on spring of 2025. We saw some economic numbers that have been predicted over the last couple of years. So when we saw things kind of trough, there were initial estimates that we weren't going to see any return to application volume until 2025, just because so many people were locked in at these low interest rates to the point where I saw some metrics somewhere that about 80% of fixed rate mortgages in the United States were under 3.5% for an interest rate. That's a lot. I mean, what are you going to do
Wow.
if interest rates are 8? So all those people who had equity in their houses and who were older and wanted to downsize, or people who were in houses, starter homes that they didn't want and wanted to upgrade, well, it's not going to do you much good if your mortgage payment's going to triple. Even putting down is like you say you sell your house and you made double the money, but if your mortgage payment's going to triple, like what am I leaving for? So we just saw an absolute freeze, this lock-in effect that really kind of froze, and it's made the market very strange. The number of listings cratered, there just weren't any houses for sale, which, as supply and demand works, means prices have been going up because there is there is a demand, but there's scarcity and just there aren't any houses for sale. We've slowly seen that open up, but everyone's got eyes to 2025 to see, like, that will, I think, probably be the indicator if this thaw is kind of over. Like, those people have been holding on for 2 or 3 years. Well, if they've lost their jobs or they want to relocate or they want to downsize, how long do you want to hold off on that? Like, it's going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of when's it going to happen. Like, we don't like this house. It's on a busy road. We have kids now. It's too small for us. Well, are we going to sit here for day after day, month after month, year after year? We have seen rates retreat from the high water mark. They have come down. That has spurred some changes. And so all eyes are kind of to this fall with the election and the market. If rates fall, we do expect volume to continue to increase. But really the hope is to be a more normal market where houses now come back on to be listed, to be sold. And then we expect kind of a decline in prices. So as more houses come on, we should see things start to come down. And although people like to say that's bad, that's probably good overall for the market for prices to kind of ease a little bit. Things used to sell at or above ask price everywhere. That's no longer the case. I've seen houses that have been on the same street, built around the same time, sell for under, at, and over ask. So it's just one of those things, whatever the individual appeal of a property is.
That's wild. You mentioned refinances, so I would love to talk about that. Again, going back to what people can't share at a dinner party, do people tend to get into trouble? So I know in 2020 and 21, it was a really big refinance market. Do people, I should say, get into trouble when they take a cash out refi and put all the money back into their home? I know that there's conditions around rate in the market, but have you seen things go haywire for people who decide, oh, honey, I really want that $200,000 kitchen remodel, take the money out? Walk me through what that's like. Because
Yeah,
again, we only see the shiny finished,
yeah,
marble top
yeah.
product at the end.
There's two parts of that. So one of the other things I actually do a lot of construction to permanent underwriting for the United States. So I've done it in all 50 states, people who want to build their own houses. And there's this disconnect with people that, well, if I build this house, if I spend $500,000 building this house, it's going to be worth $1 million. Well, actually the inverse is true. There's no premium for building your own home. Almost every construction loan I underwrite, the appraised value of what it's going to be worth when everything is done is lower than the cost to construct it. On virtually all of them, including all 50 states. So there are very rare exceptions, but people just cannot get their heads around that. It's the same effect for remodeling. I just had a file yesterday where a guy was very irate. He spent 2 years and $300,000 upgrading a beautiful 2-unit property that he owned in a very nice community. And at the end, he got about $100,000 increase in value. And how much money did he spend on it? Not a great return. So
Whoa.
it happens, and it happens more than you think. So it really, you need to think of, who am I doing these repairs for? If there's some mystical person in the future who's really going to appreciate your avocado appliances, you really have to be honest with yourself. Like, what am I doing? Is this for me and my family? In which case, hey, I'm all for it. You just need to be aware. You may not recover dollar for dollar, if anything. So yeah, we do see people who sink a lot of money, took money out to renovate the properties, and a lot of times aren't seeing that huge return. Now, of course, some things are better than others. Kitchens and baths are great. A lot of people take money out to finish the basement. I can tell you now, there's just no money in it. And that's where people get the most irritated. Is I saw one where this guy had this beautiful $2 million home, and it was gorgeous, and it was big. And he sunk another $2 million of his own money into the basement. It was the nicest basement I've ever seen. It looked like a hunting lodge. It just went on and on. I think he had about 3 bedrooms, 3 full baths, a full kitchen, movie theater, uh, golf simulator, golf simulating putting green. He had a pool table. He had everything. It was beautiful. And the appraised value came back at what he originally bought the house for without the improvements
Stop
to the
it.
basement. There's just no value. Like, if you're somebody buying a $2 million house, yeah, basement's nice. It's yeah, sure. But if you were buying it, would you willing to be paying another $2 million for a nice finished basement? You're like, I mean, for $2 million, I could buy a second house. Like, do I really, sure, there's some value in it, but in different markets, it's really priced out differently. So you really have to be careful with that. The
Wow.
other half of that is people took money out to pay off debts. And we've just learned, and I've learned over the years, if you're doing that, you're going to continue doing it.
Mm.
Nobody ever gets out from under. If you're the type of person who's run up these sorts of things and you want to take money out to pay those things off, there's a tendency for all of that stuff to come back, which is just totally heartbreaking for me. It is not unusual to see the same people come back over and over again. And they're always doing cash out refi and they're always paying off debt. In an appreciating market, it seems like an infinite money glitch. Like, this is great. Well, my house was worth $200,000 last year. It's worth $400,000 this year. Next year, it's going to be worth $600,000. Year after that, it's going to be worth $1 million. And it might actually work out for you over a period of time, especially like this last, 8 years. We've been on a pretty good market increase. And people just think, again, it's like the people who are high earners. Like, I'm going to make $100,000 next month. What are we even talking about? Who cares? People get caught up, and I just see it come, and I'm just like, they're going to come back again, and they're stripping the equity away from their home, which is probably their only or biggest asset that they have. And what are you really doing with this money? And maybe your house will appreciate and continue to appreciate forever. And if so, that's great. And you're doing great things with it. But if it doesn't, you're now upside down. Are you now, at risk of losing this family house? Was it really worth it to get the RV? People really need to make these decisions and determine what they really want to do. There was some legislation that was passed about ability to repay in a qualified mortgage. So we are now obligated in some respects to make a objective, if that's such a thing can be made, an objective determination in some of these scenarios to say, listen, you've already been here twice. This is your third cash out refi. You keep saying you're using the money to pay off the debt. We do. And it's back. Like, at some point, like, you're not the best person to determine your financials. Like, you need somebody else to kind of step in here. It's very sad to see. And that's generally what we see. It breaks down in those two camps. I hope the people taking money to improve the house are improving it, and it's exactly what they want, and they're going to stay there forever, and and they see a return on that value, but it doesn't happen a lot of times.
No, that's great advice. I feel like that's advice that Peter and I got a while ago, which is if you're going to put money into your home, do it because you want to, do it because you like it. Because don't think that the next guy, like, don't live thinking that the next guy is going to love what you love, right? Like the avocado appliances, which I wish I had. But any other as we're kind of coming to the end here, my last question for you, any other advice for people who are either thinking of purchasing a home or who maybe are on the outside looking in through a proverbial window? Maybe you could dispel some of the myths out there that maybe even yourself have had over the years, but
Yeah.
now you're just, it's old hat for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. First things first, if it's just an itch in the back of your brain, is talk to a loan officer. Just first things first, and just see where you're at. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't cost anything. Just go in. Somebody just asks, hey, do you know who'd you use? Your local credit union, whoever, and just ask, just see, hey, where are we at? And at least you can get a ballpark and see, if your credit is horrible. Okay, well, now it's not going to happen. Even if it does house falls in your lap tomorrow, you need a plan and you need time to kind of work through those things. Or if you are in a good spot, somebody just says, hey, that's great. Here's an estimate. If you're looking in this band, it's going to cost you X amount of money roughly per month, and you're going to need X amount of money. So let's think about, where is this money going to come from? I can't tell you the amount of people who come in and are just utterly flabbergasted about, wait, I have to make a down payment? Like, a lot of people are just in this mindset, like, I thought someone was going to give me the money, like all of it,
That'd be
which
nice.
occasionally happens, and that would be great. But, like, if you're buying a $200,000 house and you're going to make a down payment of 10%, well, that's at least $20,000. Where is it? And people are astonished. And then we ask them, okay, well, where is the money and when is it going to be here? And a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm going to get it. Don't worry, I'm good for it. And it's like, okay, well, we trust you, but we need to know where it is. And there's a lot of regulation in terms of, we need to find out where it came from and how is it getting there. Because if you think you're going to show up at closing with a suitcase full of cash and $100 bills, and the closing attorney is going to have a money counter, it doesn't work like that. So I just had some folks last week who were buying a sizable house and had a significant down payment, who keep asking, where is the money? And they showed up, and it is a stack of pawn slips where they took it upon themselves to sell $90,000 of gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and diamonds. And unfortunately, not even bullion. Like, I'm actually familiar with all of those things. Like, I have seen that stuff, so I actually know about it. It wasn't bullion. It was like bracelets, earrings, rings, multiple bracelets, chain link, pendants. And it's
Oh,
like, we have to prove where this stuff came from. How are you going to prove that Aunt Sally gave you 6 pounds of pure gold rope bracelets? And then looking at the pawn slips and trying to figure out, wait a minute, you went to a pawn shop and I know enough about it. Like, okay, well, the weight of gold is X. You sold so many ounces. Why did they pay you more than the spot price of these things? Like, it just didn't add up. And you can just sort of, like, doing this for a while, I can kind of tell when things are just off. Like, this just doesn't, like, you got a real problem here. I don't doubt that these folks probably did have the gold sitting in a safe at home, trying to document ownership. I'm just telling you now, like, it's just not going to work. So we need to come back and think about, how are we coming with down payment? Let's delay the closing and figure this out. We see a lot of that, of people trying to work out money where it's like, oh, it's going to be a gift. Okay, from who? Uh, well, no, I'll hit up cousin Dave and then my buddy Bob. Like, there are guidelines, and, like, especially with government products, where it's by law you have to make a down payment, and if you're getting a gift, it has to be from these types of people, and it has to be related, and it has to be a blood relative. Like, you need to know all of this stuff up front. Or a lot of people say, oh, it's from my cousin. Like, your actual cousin, or like your buddy you went to sixth grade with and you just call your cousin? We have had to prove to the government, when somebody wrote cousin on a gift letter, that they were actually cousins, to the point of getting birth certificates from their parents and their siblings and proving that they were actually related. So you just want to tell your loan officer, just be honest, and be honest with them immediately and upfront. Here's what my plan is. I'm going to get some money from Dave. And they're going to say, well, your buddy Dave can't gift you the money. So let's talk about alternatives. Like, can mom and dad give you a gift? Can your actual cousin give you a gift? So the big thing is money. I also just had some folks, they had probably 18 or 20 bank accounts. I don't know why. This is a fairly common thing, where, they had, it's at all different institutions, and they just start by moving money, just back and forth and up and down, and selling things and transferring things and taking loans and taking. It's just, you're just making it really confusing on yourself, and really confusing for other people to figure out. Like, it's just, all it does is just take time to kind of unwind, because we have to document and source where the stuff came from. So just tell your loan officer upfront what you're doing, where the money's coming from, get it all set up, and get it done in advance, is like number one. And number two is, don't quit your job. Don't, like, it happens all the time. I just had one yesterday where the lady, just like the day before closing, like, we're going to validate the stuff all the way through that you're still working. Like, we have to use that validated documentation to prove that you are working, that you earn the income that you earn. So when you quit your job the day before you're closing, well, sorry, but you're not closing, because you no longer have an income source. We just can't trust that you're going to go out and get a new job. So just, again, just be honest and upfront with your loan officer. If you're saying, hey, I'm thinking about leaving, can we talk about what this would look like if I have an offer letter or things starting? That happens all the time. Or people who live in Florida and be like, hey, I heard it's great in northern New York, so I'm going to move there. And then the loan officer say, great, what's going to be your income source? Oh, well, I was planning on quitting my job. I'll move up there and then I'll figure it out. Well, we can't do that. We need to know up front, like, what your job is going to be. So whether you're going to have to move here in advance and look for work, and then when you rent, we find a place, we can work something out for you. But at least you're going to know well in advance of a month before closing, oh, actually, I just quit my job and I don't have a new one, and I got to figure it out. So, boy, can you guys work this out for me? Yeah.
that's some sage advice there. And I appreciate it. Makes me, I feel better, because I felt like navigating the waters of first time home ownership was a little bumpy, and I had industry experience. I feel better that I wasn't alone though. And navigate, I mean, I didn't have a cousin. I wish I had a cousin who gave me money, but Joe, thank you so much. Again, I almost wonder if you don't take for granted the unique perspective you have on people's lives, both from seeing their homes in the photos of an appraisal to seeing their financial statements in a way that most people will never know what really is going on. So I do appreciate not just the upper echelon, but everyday Americans and people, like me, who still have a lot to learn, is figuring out, as we continue to grow and grow up, what it's like to purchase property and be, financially savvy. So thank you for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations, for all of your insights and for being, like I said, in my orbit.
This is great. It's great to be here.